Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am going to discuss John Keats as a sensuous poet. In order to discuss John Keats as a sensuous poet, we must know what does the word sensuousness mean. The word sensuousness means something related to our five senses. In literature, sensuous poetry is that kind of poetry which influences our five senses. That is, the sense of sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. In simple words, sensuous poetry is that kind of poetry which appeals to our senses and gives us aesthetic pleasure. Sensuous poetry appeals to our eyes by presenting beautiful and colorful word pictures. It appeals to our ears by its metrical music and musical sounds. Similarly, it appeals to our nose by arousing our sense of smell. Keats was of the opinion that poetry should appeal to the senses and art should create beauty. John Keats is sensuous in his approach towards poetry because he was a worshipper of beauty and pursued beauty everywhere. These were his senses that revealed to him the beauty of things. In one of his letters, he says, "Oh, for a life of sensation rather than of thoughts." It means that he is more a poet of sensuousness than of contemplation. It should be noted that poetry originates from sense impression, and in this sense, we can say that all poets are more or less sensuous. Among all the poets, Keats is the most sensuous. Now let us see how John Keats' poetry appeals to our five senses and whether it is true that Keats is the most sensuous poet of all or it is just a poetic exaggeration. It is true that Keats is the most sensuous poet among all other poets because his poetry appeals to our five senses, the detail of which is as under. Number first, sense of sight. Keats' poetry appeals to our sense of sight because it presents beautiful and colorful pictures before our eyes. Keats is a painter in words. With the help of a few words, he presents a very beautiful and concrete picture before us. For example, in one of his poems, he says, "Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild." These pictures remain firmly fixed in our memory. Number second, sense of hearing. Keats' poetry greatly appeals to our ear by its musical sounds. For example, the music of the nightingale produces great pain in poet's heart. For example, "The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown." Number third, sense of touch. Keats' poetry also appeals to our sense of touch. For example, the opening line of La Belle Dame Sans Merci describe the scenery and weather to be too cool. For example, he says, "The sage is weather from the lake and no birds sing." Number 4, sense of taste. Keats' poetry appeals to our sense of taste. In his poem, Ode to a Nightingale, Keats described many vines. Similarly, in La Belle Dame Sans Merci, he says, "She found me roots of relish sweet, of honey, wild and manna div." Here, honey and manna div appeals to our sense of taste. Number 5. Sense of smell. Keats' poetry also appeals to the sense of smell. For example, in Ode to Nightingale, he says, "Fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunts of lies on summer's eves." Here, the poet is unable to see the flowers because there is darkness, but he can tell about the smell of each flower. So, to conclude, we can say that there are many references in the poetry of John Keats which prove him to be the most sensuous poet of all the poets. So, it was all about the topic John Keats is a sensuous poet. Thank you for watching. Allah Hafiz.